All right, welcome back to Rising Stronger Radio. This is your host, Keith. In this episode, we're going to talk about a specific methodology for building mental and emotional resilience. Okay, so before we get into the specifics, one thing I want to say is stay tuned to the end because the last component I'm going to talk about is actually going to be somewhat of a bottoms up component to emotional resilience and mental resilience. In other words, how we can use our body, our physiology to be more resilient mentally and emotionally. So I think you'll really enjoy that. And then I also want to just touch on what is mental and emotional resilience. I think we all have an idea of, what it is to us personally. And, I think that I would say the ability to move through challenges and adversity without being broken. And when we do feel like we're broken down, being able to get back up and keep going. And even in a more tangible sense, like the ability to bring ourselves back to baseline, to calm down our mind when we do go through something, challenging or frantic, the ability to not lose our cool or not lose our, our ultimate vision of where we're going, in spite of all of the odds and ends along the way. And I think that mental and emotional resilience is something that varies for people. Some people are born, or like naturally develop a deep sense of resilience in that way. And for some people, less so. But I think it's definitely something that can be learned. And there are absolutely tangible ways to develop it, which is what we're going to talk about. And I really want to emphasize that I think, as with anything else related to, personal development, becoming a better version of yourself, improving your health, improving your mental and emotional resilience, it's a practice. Like, it has to be seen as a practice because none of this is just going to happen instantaneously. There needs to be a deliberate practicing of, these techniques, let's say, and tactics in order for that to become more of a second nature thing, which it will. But, for most people, it's going to be something that, maybe you listen, you're like, oh, this sounds good, I'm going to put these into practice. But maybe you do, here and there, and you realize, well, I haven't been, or I didn't there, rather than, falling off the wagon. It's just something that has to be repeatedly implemented and seen as progress and not perfection, let's say. And lastly, before we get started, it's so important to take action. Like, you can listen to stuff like this and you can fill your mind with all these good ideas, but if you don't really take it on yourself to put it into practice, to take action on, these ideas and principles, it's not going to do anything. So I encourage you very much to, even if you take one of these things, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a free download with all of these that I'm going to talk about because I think they're that important. But if you want to, you can go to risingstronger.com. I didn't make this yet, but I'm going to, and you can download this that will list all of these out. I suggest hanging it somewhere or keeping it somewhere you can see. Pick one and implement it, or pick two and implement them, and continue to take action on them until they become, second nature. With that said, let's get into how to become more mentally and emotionally resilient. So the first, let's say, technique that I wanted to talk about, and there's many, you can probably find other effective, this is by no means an exhaustive list, other effective techniques. The first one, though, that has been really useful for me and that I think is a very easy one to implement comes from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which I've, been blessed to train under an ACT therapist to a degree and, learn some independently. But the first principle is what's called acceptance. ACT stands for acceptance and commitment therapy. And acceptance is the practice of, in the midst of something that you absolutely don't want to be happening. Maybe things are falling apart. You're in a challenging conversation, you're in a debate or an argument, or you've gotten into an accident, whatever it is, something that you don't want to happen, deliberately and intentionally accepting it. And we don't just do that by saying that we accept it. That is part of it. You may say, like, in your mind, I accept this. I'm gonna make this work for me. I'm gonna learn from this. I'm gonna grow from this, but I'm going to be open, even though it's uncomfortable, even though I wish it weren't happening in some sense, or that's my natural reaction to it. But we also accept physically. You'll notice that oftentimes when people are in a state of, not accepting something, we tend to hunch, we tend to close up, fold our arms, bring our legs closer, our pelvis closer to our rib cage, like just close down. When we are accepting, it's an opening, standing up tall, opening our shoulders, maybe even, if you're watching this on YouTube, like spreading your arms and just being completely open to physically to what's happening. And that will influence your psychology. So that's actually not even what I was referring to in terms of our, like, using our body to become more mentally and emotionally resilient. But that is part of it, is that when posturally we are in a state of, empowerment and acceptance, our brain is going to respond in a different way than if we're closing off. So you can also think of acceptance as the idea of like bearing your cross. Every single person, all of us have different challenges in our lives. Some are going to be more acute and short term. Some are going to be longer term. But it's the same idea of willingly accepting whatever it is that has been put on our plate for us to face, even if it doesn't feel fair, even if it's painful, even if it involves something that there's no way to make sense of, that it's hurt, that causes pain and hurt. It's all part of life. So it's just accepting that that's what it is. So see if you can try that. I mean, even in small situations, when you're stuck in traffic, or you're going to have a uncomfortable conversation or whatever it is, just starting to implement, like, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with feeling uncomfortable. I'm okay with feeling nervous or frustrated or scared or whatever that is. Just saying yes to it. It doesn't mean it's going to go away. It's accepting that it's there and moving forward anyway. The second component of this also comes from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's the idea that our thoughts don't dictate our actions, and our thoughts don't have to determine the way that we live our lives. For most of us, that isn't the case. We have a thought, and we just sort of accept it as true. We accept whatever we're thinking as like, okay, here's this thought, and we follow it. And oftentimes our thoughts are illogical, irrational, or not logical, irrational, like not worth following, making up a story about why somebody did something, or why somebody hasn't responded to us, or why, this or that, what somebody's thinking. It's nonsense most of the time. So when we understand that from the perspective, and this is something that, I've even recently like reconnected with, I'll say, and I watch how powerful it is in my life, understanding that the thoughts that we have don't have to determine how we act or the action that we take. I can have a thought that I don't want to do something and do it. Like, my thought about what I need to do is irrelevant to whether I can actually do it or not. Sometimes I'll want to, sometimes I'll be motivated to do something. Sometimes I'll, want to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes there's not motivation. Sometimes I won't want to do the things that I need to do. And again, it's a practice. Like, I'm imperfect in every way in this type of thing. But when you see this and think about it that way, it can really change your relationship to your thoughts. And that's what we want to do. Like, you're not going to get rid of irrational thoughts. You're not going to get rid of thoughts that are negative and conspiring and all this kinds of stuff. It's really just changing the relationship, that we don't have to, like, that doesn't have to dictate our reality. We don't have to engage with them necessarily. So again, there's many techniques that you can go about to employ this. One that I think it's really simple and easy, is to disobey your thoughts on purpose. And the way that you would do this in a very simple manner, like you might even, if you're listening to this while you're driving, you might even right now just repeat to yourself, I can't drive this car right now. I can't drive this car right now. I can't drive this car right now. Or I can't listen to this podcast or video right now. I can't listen to this podcast right now. I can't listen to this. Or scratch your arm, itch your arm, and say, I can't itch my arm right now. And what you're doing is you're reinforcing in a deeper way that you can disobey your thoughts, that what you do, the actions that you take, don't have to correspond with what your thoughts want you to do or what they think about it. So it's a practice that you can do it anytime, anywhere, with the most ridiculous stuff. Like you can get up and walk around and say, I can't walk around. That's the specific technique that that I learned in ACT. I can't walk around this room right now. I can't walk around this room right now. I can't walk around this room right now. And you do that enough that you just start to see that, like, okay, my thoughts are saying this, whatever, I can do what I need to do anyway, do what I want to do anyway. You can also, as a kind of a part B to this, just recognize your thoughts and just thank them, because our minds are wild. They go all over the place. They're constantly trying to problem solve, oftentimes problems that don't really even need to be solved, trying to make sense of things. So when we're starting to have thoughts that we recognize, like, oh, I'm getting stuck in my head, you can just thank your thoughts. Just recognize that your thoughts are separate from who you are, and say, thank you. Thank you. Thank you to my thoughts. Thank you. Just, direct it toward the thought and then disengage from it. It's that, like, breaking that space in between that kind of allows you to disengage. It creates a gap between your own awareness and the thought that you're having, and that kind of allows you not to get sucked into it. The third one is the idea of having let's say a role model or a mentor in mind that is observing what you're doing and how you're doing it. And this is a practice that, I think this permeates all spiritual and religious traditions to a large extent. Like, I've seen it in various different ones, but the first place I think I came across it was Stoicism. Like, that you might pick somebody, maybe you're familiar with Stoicism, like you might pick somebody like Marcus Aurelius, or in Christianity, you might pick somebody like Jesus. And it's the idea that, especially when you're in a situation that you're just not feeling like you have the mental and emotional capacity, let's say the resilience, to get through what you're going through, or to do whatever it is that you're doing in in the best way to the best capacity that you can do it, like that you want to take a shortcut or cheat somebody or whatever, you can do something because nobody else is looking. It's having this person who's so much further along in that path than you are, keeping that in mind as if they were there watching you, because that's the truth. If you did have some mentor, you had somebody that was helping you to develop, and you were in a situation, you were having a conversation. I think conversation's a really good one for this, but we're having a conversation with somebody, you would be much more careful about what you say and how you say it if that person were sitting there in the room or standing there. So there's a similar concept. I'm sure it's in the book of Proverbs that says something along the lines of, live your values even when nobody's looking, or even behind closed doors. And it's just that idea that's what really builds mental and emotional resilience, and like the character of such, I think, is that we can live up to the ideals of who we should be, and like the better version of ourselves, even when it's not just for show, and even not just in front of people. But again, we can employ that tactic of imagining somebody, and I would encourage you to pick somebody. If you have a philosopher, or you have a psychologist, like dead or alive, that you find helpful to you, a saint, establishing one person like that you feel connected to, and invite them along with you. Invite them to be in these challenging situations and receive, emotional and mental strength and resilience in those challenging times or in those exhausted times, from knowing that, from envisioning, in some sense it's real because of how we respond to it, but that person is there. The next one, number 4, is treating challenging situations as if it's the second time that we're going through them, which is a really interesting idea. I actually saw this in a movie one time, but it comes from other places as well. But the idea is essentially that oftentimes when we're, especially in something that feels emotionally challenging or is bordering on what our capacity to deal with is, we just get sucked into it. It happens all the time. I mean, it happens to me all the time. I know it. You can watch it happen to other people, but you just get sucked into a situation, especially when it's unknown, especially when we don't know like how the situation's going to pan out, how the conversation's going to go, how somebody's going to respond to something that we did wrong or made a mistake. And again, it takes, this is why it's a practice, because you won't necessarily remember to do this. But if you can, and this can piggyback off of thanking our thoughts, creating that space, separating ourselves, and then saying, like, if this were the second time that this happened, or if I had a chance to go back and do this better, how would I want to do it? So in other words, you may walk away, like I have this happen often, from a conversation and just being like, I should have been nicer. I should have been more patient. I should have listened. I shouldn't have said what I said, all of that. If you can catch yourself beforehand and say, if this were the second time I was having this conversation, if it already happened and I knew it didn't go well, and now I get a chance to redo it and do it better, what would I do? And just, again, that separates us from our thoughts. It creates a space between our own awareness and our, ability to think and be deliberate from our emotions and from, just whatever thoughts are stemming from the emotional state that we're in. So how would I handle this situation if it were the second time that I was doing it and I wanted to have the outcome be better than the first time? The 5th component is to trust in a bigger plan. Trust in, like, the fact that, there's just there's a lot that we don't understand about how things happen. And, you can take this in a religious direction or like a spiritual direction. You can also take it in a very practical and psychological direction, I think. For instance, if you just, like, most of us don't follow through the challenging things that happen to us to see where they lead. And what I mean by that is we may have something happen that feels, that it's undesired. It feels like not something we want to go through, whatever it is. And we often stop there. This thing was terrible. And we forget to pay attention to all of the things that take place in our lives, that potentially change in our lives, the way that we change personally as a result of that thing happening. And one phrase that actually comes from a Red Hot Chili Pepper song that was really impactful on me when I was first, coming off of drugs and trying to, stay off of drugs, trying to get to a better place, is overcome and more will always be revealed. Like, just get through whatever it is and trust that if you pay attention, you'll see a bigger picture later, in some sense. And again, life isn't necessarily fair or easy. It doesn't mean that the pain will go away or that whatever we feel like we lost will come back. But if we pay attention, we will see that in the grand scheme of things, both personally and maybe collectively, like, these things that happen need to happen. I really believe if we pay attention to that we will see that there are bigger there are bigger purposes and deeper meanings to the challenges that often seem mundane and unnecessary in our lives. And you can, like, I think it's a big reason why in spiritual and religious traditions of saying things like God's will, not mine, be done, because we do have such a small perception, a small perspective on what's happening. And most often, 99 out of 100 times, what we think we want or what we think is the best way for something to happen often isn't the best for us in terms of what we actually need. It's not the best for the people around us, maybe. And the one time out of 100 that we do, like, what we actually want is the best way, it's often by accident. Like, I think it's a very healthy perspective to hold that, like, maybe I don't know what's best all the time. And again, that has to be coupled, in my opinion, to the idea that like life isn't supposed to be easy. It's not always fair. There's going to be pain. You accept all of that. And then you realize that, okay, the purpose of life and the direction that I'm going isn't in order to avoid pain, sadness, depression, discomfort, et cetera, et cetera. It's to live and to grow and to be a part of and to all of these things, to evolve. And so when you have that perspective, then it's much easier to say something like God's will, not mine, be done, to just trust that what's happening is happening because we need it on some level, because we need to participate in what somebody else needs in some level. And you don't have to like get too far into it. I don't think it's worth analyzing, but just trusting. And if you even just as a test say, I'm going to try to trust it and see what happens, and you just practice that, you'll see that it's true. It's been so true in my life, and I believe that anybody who gives it a chance to be true in theirs will see, like, there's not randomness to all the stuff happening. Like, things happen in a way that participates in a bigger vision of reality. The next one is, and this might be, this is more of a taking a decisive stance about yourself, and something maybe that you come back to frequently or often as needed, is deciding that you desire to be stronger, to be mentally stronger, to be emotionally stronger and more resilient. Like, just deciding that is what you want. Because if you decide that that's what you want, then, and this ties into the last point, if you decide that's what you want, then the challenges that you face are there to help you become more mentally and emotionally resilient, to practice the tools and techniques that you have, to see yourself walking through the fire, so to speak, and coming out on the other side, even if you get burned. So I think just establishing that desire that you want to be somebody who's stronger is and maybe I should have put that first, but is a decisive step and something to, again, remember in these, in challenging situations, and situations seem so short term. Maybe it's a challenging thing that lasts 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever. But remembering that you want to be stronger, that you want to burn off the parts of you that you feel are weak, or that you feel, aren't living up to what you could be, that hold you back. And so it's with that worldview, it's with that, view of ourselves, that we realize that the things that we face are there, for us and not against us, or not happening to us, but happening for us. So making that decision. Now we're going to get into the physiological components. I got a little excited about that because I think these are as useful as anything, any psychological tools, like the kinds of things that we've been talking about, I think they're as useful. And I think that when these two are put into practice, both the psychology and the physiology, or the, the biological components, taking our bodies into account, bringing our bodies into the picture of being more mentally and emotionally resilient, that there's a synergy where 1 + 1 = 3, so to speak. And so I'm going to talk about, well, I'm going to break this into 2 parts, and part 2 has 6 different components. The first part is to feel your feelings. This is especially powerful when you're overwhelmed, let's say. Like because if you think about what a feeling is, what an emotion is energy in motion, emotion. So emotions are not just a thought process, although thoughts, negative thoughts, disparaging thoughts often go along with emotions. But emotions are sensations, physical sensations. It's often that we feel it in our body, maybe more so in one place, maybe in our chest, in our gut, in our shoulders, in our neck, like wherever it is. But oftentimes when we feel that overwhelming physical feeling, we try to fight it in our head. We try to think our way out of the way that we feel, and it doesn't work. So rather than do that, rather than looking down from our brain, from our mind to our body, we're not necessarily thinking about doing it this way, but looking down and thinking about how I can not feel this way, how I can resolve this situation. Rather than doing that, if you instead move your awareness, and by awareness, I mean if you right now close your eyes, or just if you can't close your eyes, feel your hand. Feel the bottom of your foot. Like just feel that sensation. There's a sensation there. That's been there the whole time. That's been there every minute of the day, but you're just not thinking about it. We're not like, and fine, we don't need to be all the time, but that's always there. The reason why I did that is you can shift your awareness to a bodily awareness, where we're tuning into the sensations of our body. And when we're having a strong emotional reaction, an overwhelming emotional reaction, dropping that awareness down and really trying to feel it without judgment, without saying, I don't want this to be there, without saying, I want this to go away, without saying, I don't like the way this feels, just dropping down and feeling what we're feeling, like tuning into it. And it might happen that you jump back up into your head and you start thinking about it, and then you have to drop back down. But even like, I would almost go as far as to say, I promise that if you were to take in an emotionally overwhelming situation, when you're feeling like you're just going to explode in whatever way, maybe you're sad, frustrated, angry, and you drop your awareness and really experience, with the purpose of experiencing the emotion that you're having, what you will notice is that it just starts to loosen, and just start to dissolve. Like it just starts to evaporate. That's a really interesting thing. Like this works. You have to do it though. Again, like it has to be put into action, but just tap into, or bring your awareness down into the physical sensations you're having, and just be with it. Uncomfortable as it may be, just experience it. Don't want it to go anywhere. Don't sit there trying to say like, all right, like go away. Just be with it. And from that neutral standpoint, especially, I think it's very important not to try to fight it. From that neutral standpoint of just experiencing it, it tends to just resolve. And with that, the coupled spiraling thought patterns, racing mind, anxious, negative thoughts, like tend to calm as well. So try that. And again, I'm going to put all this together in a free download. So you can, if you want to download, you can have it on your phone, you can save it somewhere, but come back to these things. Like, this is the stuff. And I should have said in the beginning too, I mentioned a little bit about, coming off of drugs, but these are the types of things that I didn't necessarily like have all this in an ordered way in my own, journey, let's say, but these are the types of things that have literally, I say this wholeheartedly, allowed me to put drug addiction behind me, to put depression behind me. Doesn't mean I never like have days where I feel depressed, but to put all that behind me because I understand how to deal with the situations, circumstances, short and long term, internal sensations and feelings and thought patterns, and not let them dictate my life. And again, I'm so far from perfect in doing it, but it's even that is a testament to the fact that like you don't have to be perfect with this kind of stuff. You just essentially have to see it working to some degree, and then this stuff loses its power over you. Even when you don't employ this perfectly on the back end, you just go, like I forgot to put this stuff into practice, and look what happened. Or you can do it then. Like if you're facing consequences based on handling something poorly or getting, sucked into something, you can put them into practice then. But this stuff can be absolutely life-changing. Like we all see the world through glasses. There's no way around it. Every single person has some pair of glasses that they are viewing the world through. And when we can change the lens that we see the world through, like it sounds cliche, but like the world does change. We see that the world, the way that we interact with the world and the happenings of the world and the people out in the world, like we can change how we respond to it. We can change what it means in our lives. And like that is life-changing. So the second component of the physiological, the biological, the related to the body components are to be in tune with the 6 basic components of health and healing. I have a better way of saying it, but essentially these 6 components of our biology, of being a human, that are so immensely important for just functioning optimally, for feeling well, for having energy, for keeping our, for helping to avoid those negative and racing thought patterns. Our biology and our psychology is like a loop, and it often does become like a vicious cycle. Our negative thinking or our negative perceptions, right, based on what we've been talking about, goes in and influences our biology. The stress that we're unable to adequately or skillfully deal with shuts down, our digestive juices, and we eat and can't digest our food properly. And now we have a biological stress that then the unbroken down food circles back up and triggers, negative thoughts and racing thoughts. So you have to see yourself as a human being, as a mind-body creature, 100%. There's no separation between the two. We can see them as different things, but there's 2 sides of the same coin. And so these 6 basic components of being a human being and of being a healthy human being and healing when you don't feel like you have, are in a good state of health. I'm going to name each one, and then I'm going to briefly touch on why they relate to mental and emotional resilience. So each one of them: proper nutrition, adequate sleep, adequate hydration, adequate movement, proper breathing, and sufficient time outdoors and in nature. How does nutrition play a role? Easy, both short and long term. When your blood sugar's low, think about when you get to that point of hunger, even if you've been resilient this far, where you are hangry, where you feel like you're going to rip somebody's head off if you don't eat. This will absolutely change our behavior. This will change our outlook. This biological component absolutely influences our thoughts when we get to this place. And in order to bring our blood sugar back up, let's say, if you're not familiar with this concept of blood sugar. Hopefully this is simple enough to make sense of it, but to then release adrenaline and cortisol, stress hormones, in order to bring it back up, that influences our thoughts and our perceptions. So being able to regularly consume balanced meals and snacks, yeah, it's going to help you, have more energy. It's going to help you be more confident in the way that you look, like by eating well, eating healthy foods. But it's also going to help you show up differently to your job and the tasks that are at hand, to your family, to the people that you care about and interact with, to strangers. Like, the way that you show up is going to be different when you understand how to regulate your biology properly. And it's not always necessarily easy, but it can be as simple as just not going too long without eating every 2.5 to 4 hours, something balanced, carbs, fats, and proteins, not just carbs, which is what most people go to, and especially not just carbs and caffeine. And then in a longer term sense of the biology, like when we're deficient in nutrients, it's going to, again, impact the way that we think, act, and feel. It just is. So eating well absolutely plays a role in our mental and emotional resilience. And with each of these 6 things, I could go like very deep into them because they're so critical in this way. But to go to the next one, adequate sleep. Being under-rested, for sure. I mean, you can look at stuff from like Harvard and data on, let's say, study findings on how mental and emotional resilience, cognitive functioning, our abilities to concentrate and to concentrate and to show up fully to the tasks that we're working on, or the situations at hand, are fully impacted by if we're rested, if we've slept enough. So getting enough sleep and getting quality sleep, if you feel like you're struggling in this department, I have another podcast all about how to fix and optimize sleep. It's definitely something that can be changed, but it's so important. When we're under rested, like physiologically, the playing field on which we're playing is different. Hydration. It's shown that as little as 1% dehydration of the central nervous system can lead to serious psychological issues. Our brain is like 75% water. Again, we're brain body beings, we're mind body beings. So when something's off biologically, it is going to impact our mental and emotional capacity. So super important to stay hydrated. How? Simple rules of thumb: half your body weight of ounces of water a day, a pinch of sea salt or some mineral drops in each glass or bottle, and spread it throughout the day, not just like chugging it all at once. That's a basic foundation for proper hydration. Movement. We're not meant to be sedentary. I did an interview recently with Tim Anderson from Original Strength, and one of the things that stuck out to me was he was saying when our body is still, our mind tends to go, and when our body is moving, our mind tends to become still. And that's so much the case of my own experience. But for so many of us in this world, we just sit all the time. We wake up and sit to have breakfast. We sit on the way to work in the car. We sit once we get to work. We sit on the way home from work. Even if we go to the gym, like we're sitting before, after we go home, sit for dinner, sit and watch TV. So, there's not necessarily a way around this. If our jobs, like my job, is in some capacity on a laptop, but we can break up all of the sitting and being sedentary with movement throughout the day. And it's how our bodies are designed to be. We're designed to move. So even if you have to sit a lot, get up often, do a couple push-ups, do some air squats, do a few lunges, the original strength resets, crawl, rock, like working this in throughout the day, going for walks, will absolutely change our psychology, will absolutely make us more mentally and emotionally resilient. So we have movement, and in addition to the movement throughout the day, which again, think about like 30 to 60 seconds, or maybe like 30 seconds to 2 minutes spread in all throughout the day. By the end of a day, a week, a month, you can get in like insane amounts of exercise and movement that again will, yes, help your physical health, but also really help your mental and emotional health and ability to be resilient, just by regularly getting out of your head, by moving your body, by moving the fluids of your body, by not letting, your body become stagnant. So the movement component is such a big one. And I like to say that movement is medicine for the mind. So again, when you're feeling, and you know what, I'm going to add this in here too. It kind of ties in with feeling your feelings, but in terms of the movement component, when you're feeling stuck in your head, you can feel your feelings. You can also just go and move. If you're feeling really overwhelmed and like worked up emotionally, bang out as many push-ups as you can. Run for like sprint for like a minute and a half. Jog in place, do jumping jacks, do a bunch of squats, and then see where your head's at. Again, emotions, energy and motion, shift the energy, and your psychology will change as a result. Adequate time outside. We need, like, our bodies are designed to look at nature. Like, there are studies showing that just looking at pictures of nature help to lower cortisol, stress hormones. Looking out the window at actual nature lowers it even more. Getting outside and being around trees and in nature does it even more so. And what's important to realize about, like, this is a huge connection for mental and emotional resilience, is that when we're constantly in a state of fight or flight, which most people are like just stuck in that state to some degree, when our adrenaline and cortisol is always like pumping, kind of got a slow drip, just always keeping us, always stuck in that state, we're kind of at the edge. Like, we're kind of already at the edge. So what ends up happening is, as soon as something comes along that could tip us over, like something that maybe we want to be a mentally and emotionally resilient toward, when we're stuck in this fight or flight state, anything that comes along is just going to tip us over. It's going to take us out of our ability to, think logically, to respond intentionally, and kind of just take us into reacting. So all this stuff that I'm talking about, sleep, food, hydration, movement, getting out in nature, they all play a role in helping us to downregulate, to shift out of the fight or flight and into the rest and relax and regenerate and repair state. And that's really the state from which we can respond again intentionally, that we have a gap between stimulus and being set off, reacting in a way that, we regret later. So getting out in nature, getting enough sunshine, like, these all play a role in our hormones. They play, our bodies are designed to hear nature, the leaves rustling, the water, of a stream, to smell the smells, to, feel the wind, to see the incongruencies. Like, we're so often stuck in like 90-degree angles of houses and cities and stuff, but to see there's a relaxing effect on the system when we're not in that environment, when we're in an environment that's imperfect, and it has a measurable effect on our system. And then the last one after nature is proper breathing. And this one could even be the first one on the list, or like the most, the lowest hanging fruit. Oftentimes our psychological and, emotional states, let's say getting into a state of anxiety or panic to some degree, is physiologically preceded by improper breathing patterns, by breathing too fast, breathing too shallow, only breathing into the upper lobes of our lungs. It's so important, like, to learn to properly breathe and to pay attention throughout the day, like to get in the habit of paying attention throughout the day. Because when you're paying attention throughout the day, just practicing, like checking in, all right, I'm breathing shallow, let me slow it down, or I'm breathing fast and shallow, let me slow it down, breathe a little more deeply. When we get regularly into the habit of checking on that, then when we're in these challenging situations, or when something's building up into a challenging situation, it's second nature to check in with our breathing. And when we can regulate our breathing, we regulate our physiology. Like our thoughts in many ways follow our breath. And so it's super important. I have a video about this on YouTube of relearning how to breathe diaphragmatically, which is one of the most important things you can do for mental and physical health. So breathing, understanding how to breathe properly, understanding how to use your breath to calm your system is, the sixth one, but I'd probably put it first on the list because it's the lowest hanging fruit. You have it with you at all times, no matter where you are. You can, you have your breath, you can practice breathing properly. So that's it. We had six psychological components to building mental and emotional resilience. In addition to, really, there were seven, the feeling your feelings, and the six components of, health and healing from the physiological standpoint, from the biological standpoint. But if you employ these things, if you put these things into practice, and you approach this type of thing from both biology and psychology, from body and mind, you can develop bulletproof resilience to, mental and emotional stressors, and be able to respond more intentionally. And again, it's a practice. Don't put a timeline on it. Don't expect it to happen right away. Accept from the start that you're going to, fall short and whatnot, but take action on it. Take action. And if you're struggling with the biological component or the psychological, but, struggling to implement healthy habits, you feel like you're not eating well, like your sleep sucks, like probably not breathing properly, you're not getting in enough movement and exercise. That's what I do. If you want help in that area, you can check out on risingstronger.com. I have a free 20-minute strategy session. What we do there is kind of establish where you're at, where you want to be, where there's a gap in that way, and we can see if you'd be a good fit for coaching. If not, I can offer resources on, what might be the right next step. So check that out. I'm going to post on there by the time, this is up. We'll have a downloadable sheet of all of these things so you can refer back to it. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. I would appreciate if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, leaving a review or giving a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.